n'avait pas de parents, puisque elle était orpheline. Comme elle n'avait pas d'argent, ce n'était pas une richissime.
Last summer, I ordered a video camera for a trip to France. My old Paris roommate Fraser was marrying a French woman. Why not make a wedding film? The camera arrived from New York the week before my trip. I had to learn how to shoot some footage, and I wanted to be able to compare images of home with France, where I was going. But what to film in America, where a quarter of the population polled during the last elections said the number one reason they'd work on a political campaign was to get a date? America, where 50% of women say they get more affection from their pets than their husbands. This is what I saw on Just Another Sunday Morning. Two young girls on a boat in the middle of the river. A kid sailing home on his skateboard. A gun nut. People dressed in orange running. A man on a bicycle. Blonde, a la convertible. A lonely shop window bride waiting patiently for her white plastic groom. We flew far north on our way to Europe, just 37,000 feet over the ocean. No guns or skateboards, no solitary brides, just icy water. The German airline was efficiency itself. Everyone stayed seated as ordered. On the video screen, we dropped onto Europe like a V-2 rocket. In the Frankfurt airport, my wife and I spied an old Frenchman. Something about him said French, even before we heard him speak. Straight from central casting. While sitting, waiting to catch his Paris flight, he talked with an American in the old man's language. It made me think of my time in France as an expatriate, 20 years ago, getting to know the French on their own turf. My soon-to-be married friend, Fraser, and I shared a house in France between 1985 and '87. I started thinking about why we'd both ended up in Paris. What attracts people to the city of light from all over the world? The longer I looked through my camera lens during my trip last year, I found myself focusing less on my friend's wedding. I was getting interested in more difficult questions, like, who are the French, and how did they get that way? So armed with 2 weeks vacation and a mail-order consumer camera, I decided to try and find out. Sacré-Cœur, Tour Eiffel, Notre Dame, Arc de Triomphe. Why do tourists want their pictures taken in front of monuments? Does traveling great distances produce a kind of Alzheimer's? Would we forget where we've been without the scrapbooks and videos? I mean, even Hitler had his picture taken in front of the Eiffel Tower, a couple of years before he tried to burn it down. I decided to start my French investigation at one of my favorite places in Paris. It's an Art Nouveau apartment building in the 7th arrondissement. It's literally a work of art, so the French are able to turn even an apartment block into art. Maybe transforming everyday objects into art is a key to Frenchness. This is the most famous modern building housing art in Paris, the Pompidou, or Beaubourg, built inside out, with the pipes on the outside. Inside, it's a parade of masterpieces and tourists and more masterpieces and more tourists. But artists seem to be everywhere in Paris. Like this guy hauling an easel on a motorcycle. Art's on bars, it's on walls, it's on sidewalks, on windows. Art is everywhere at the Frigos, the refrigerators, an old cold storage building where 100 artists squatted for years until the city let them buy the building. The night we got to Paris for the wedding, some French friends who lived there were opening an art gallery in the Frigos. That's Corinne, our co-host, and that's her husband Bertrand, and our friend Diane serving the wine. And there's the artist on the left. And his artwork? I detected a connection between Parisian feet and French art. Then I thought, how else do the French express their artistic tendencies? How about food? Who's made a higher art form of food and wine than the French? The pinnacle of French cooking was the chef Carême, who in the early 19th century said great cooking should be compared to great painting and music. When I'm in Paris, I always stop at the Brasserie Balzar for a babo au rhum, a classic French dessert. Let's see how it stacks up to American fare on Le Scoreboard. Babo au rhum, 460 calories. Big Mac, 493 calories. Babo au rhum tastes better too. Advantage, France. Paris just seems to bring out the food artist in everyone. Any visitor's memories of France must surely involve eating. Here's my friend Fraser at lunch several years ago in Paris with our friend Zaza. Here's Fraser cooking, which he does very well and frequently. Even old uptight Ernie Hemingway wrote about food in his Paris memoir, A Movable Feast. Of course, he also wrote about French sex. That's another area where the French have turned it into an art form. Everywhere you look, you see sexy eyes, sex kittens on walls, on barroom doors, penis-shaped pasta in gift shops, blowjob graffiti in the metro. Around the time I went to France for the wedding, an American condom company conducted a worldwide sex survey. Guess what? The French came out on top in humping. The Americans were in the middle and the Japanese brought up the rear. Let's take a peek on the scoreboard. France, 167 times a year. US, 111. Japan, 46 measly shags. Advantage, France. Naturally, sexy is subjective, even in Paris. I found this French girl putting on her motorcycle helmet sexy, something about the way she strapped it on. Maybe you prefer bald guys, or women in tight pants, or bikers, or bare feet, or bare hands. Maybe you're hot for little lost boys in turtlenecks, or subway lovers sharing private moments in public. And though you've no doubt heard of Spanish fly, this is the way educated flies in France do it. Meanwhile, this woman on the bicycle, whether you're animal, vegetable, or mineral, you've got to admit she's got that certain je ne sais quoi. But death was also on parade while I was in Paris. Death as it was being practiced in Iraq that summer. America's twice-born president, George Bush, was passing through town on his way to Normandy. It was the 60th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. Everywhere there were images of Bush and little love notes on walls. And on this day, 10,000 peace-loving French citizens were in the streets protesting the man that they called the #1 terrorist. Though there were 10,000 protesters, there were only 4 cops at the rally, armed with nothing more dangerous than cigarettes. This seemed to me to be the opposite cop-to-protester ratio we have in the United States. Another clue to the French mind? As thousands of people sat on the ground observing silence while the Stars and Stripes blasted over a loudspeaker, with the recorded sounds of planes and bombs, I thought, how remarkable for this many people to publicly protest some other country's war. Le scoreboard? France, 10,000 protesters, 4 cops. US, 4 protesters, 10,000 cops. And throw in some riot gear and tanks while you're at it. After the rally, I went to investigate a place where the French have even elevated death to the level of art. It's a weird little taxidermy shop. Leave it to the French to honor their rifle fodder this way. This has to be one of the more elegant ends for stuffed zebras, rabbits, foxes, birds, and bears. Oh my! There's something oddly calming about the place. Calming is not the word I'd use to describe stepping in dog poo on the Paris sidewalks, however. The city has tried to get the populace to curb their dogs. You see signs of this everywhere, but there's always more merde, which a fearless crew of green-suited city workers combat daily. Le scoreboard? France, 18 tons of dog poo annually underfoot. US, people pick it up in little plastic baggies. Advantage, US. Trains are another unexpected art form the way they're run in France. They make getting from point A to point B a lot more fun. You can go just about anywhere in France by train. Beats hell out of driving a car. More relaxing, more visually interesting. You can even meet strangers and sleep if you want to. The French have a lovely name for their railroads. The National Society of the Iron Roads. It has a better ring than Amtrak. However, the French get around on skateboards and inline skates and bicycles and motorcycles, just like Americans. The French have cars too, lots of them, but they're generally cuter than ours because they're so dinky and easy to park. That guy on the right, he got a ticket just the same. Out on the streets, it's every woman and man for themselves, though. Driving lessons are obligatory, so is speeding. After a week in Paris, it was by car, not train, that we finally went out to the country for Fraser's wedding. When we passed the windmill on the highway, we knew we were getting near Chez Fraser. Fraser lives in an old converted flour mill in a bend in the road that might be called a village. His home life is straight out of some BBC television series. There's Fraser's dog, Kelly, and Fraser's paramour, Natalie, as beautiful and charming as a script would dictate. On the blackboard in their kitchen, she put on the shopping list to give Fraser kisses every day, with pleasure. I interviewed Natalie a couple days before the wedding. When she talked about Fraser, she laughed, and then she cried. Advantage Fraser, I'd say. For the wedding, Fraser was going to wear the kilt that his father had been married in Scotland 50 years before, and so he did. On a Saturday morning, a wedding party of several dozen people took the traditional French walk to the little village mayor's office for the legal part of the ceremony. Then we did the church thing. The rest of the day was a long, perfect banquet of friends and family in the attic of the giant stone barn where a 3-hour gourmet dinner for 80 people was laid. I aimed my little spy camera at the celebrants. I finally decided that it was the French passion for living that lifted everyday life to a kind of art form. They just seemed to get a lot of the details right. Not all of them, but enough of them. Then, before you know it, 2 weeks in France had evaporated. It doesn't matter where you go when you visit a foreign country, unless you get arrested for smuggling weapons or drugs and put in jail, or something horrible like that. Your visit usually seems too short. Luckily, none of that happened to us. And so, on the way home on the plane, I was already missing Paris and its food. I avoided the sandwich and drank a French orange soda. For an instant, a passenger broke the German rules by standing, giving me hope. I watched an American girl sleeping and thought about cool images I'd seen in Paris. A little dog running after its bicycling master, an old man crossing a busy street, a silhouette on a cell phone passing under a statue. I sat on the flight back home, reconsidering my 15 things French. Some they do better than we do, some not. As I learned at the Frigos, the French have 2 feet and like to make everyday life into an art form. They're good in the kitchen, and if they aren't good in bed, at least they practice there a lot. The trains are definitely better, and their tiny cars are pretty nifty. The French are generally peaceful and don't mind giving you their opinion in public, and when they go to get married, they'd rather walk to the church than take a stretch limo. Otherwise, I guess the French are just people who speak French, and Americans are just people who speak English badly. Both flags are red, white, and blue. We just designed them differently, of course. Some British pundit once said, people wander for distraction, but they travel to be fulfilled, and I guess that's true. Every time I go to France, the French never fail to leave me with the feeling that I'm pretty fulfilled. And I learned something else on my trip last year. The next time I go back, I'm taking a tripod.
Je suis peut-être pas connu dans la noblesse ou chez les snobs. Quand on veut me trouver, faut qu'on s'adresse dans tous les petits bars. On lit mon nom sur toutes les glaces et sur les ardoises des bistrots. Le tabac du coin, c'est mon palace où le soir je retrouve mes potos.